Okay, so it starts off, it's got the same referencing, the same instructions, remember the word counts. So if you've listened to the NSS, you'll know what all of this is about. So question 1, you've got a scenario, and then you've got questions on the scenario. So explain the importance of teachers understanding semiotic systems and using them to create multimodal lessons. So why do you need to understand semiotics in order to create good multimodal systems, multimodal lessons, given that multimodal lessons are made up of semiotic systems? Then you have to look at the lesson, discuss the things you considered to be successful in this lesson. Okay, so you've got 5 marks. So you're going to need 5 points. There are things that are very successful in this lesson. And then explain the things that you do not consider to be successful and how you could improve the lesson. Okay, so you are probably looking at 5 points each, 5 things that you think were not successful, and then for each of those 5, say what you would have done differently or how you could have improved it. Okay, it's not a perfect lesson plan. For the paragraph, you have to explain the role of each of these phases and discuss important aspects that you as an educator should consider when designing each phase of the lesson. So what that means is you've got to look at the practicalities. So when you are sitting down to draw up your lesson plan for teaching experience, for example, you have to think about certain things. Think about certain practicalities. So you want to talk about what are the things that you're going to consider when you are devising your introduction phase. What are the things that you've got to take into account when you design the teaching and learning phase? Okay. Question 3, this is all about reading the question. Okay. Please make sure that you follow this exactly. This is a general resource for teaching poetry. Okay, so it's an introduction for poetry. Now, here's the thing. This resource is this PowerPoint or this slideshow is going to be emailed to all of the teachers. And they're all going to receive this file and they're all going to teach from this file. So the slideshow has to be self-explanatory. Okay, you can't just have keywords that, you know, if it were your slideshow, you would know what each keyword meant and what you would then discuss. So sometimes you do just need key points. That's absolutely fine. But it has to be a slideshow that any teacher can pick up and teach from. Okay, please make sure that your cover slide actually introduces the topic. Don't get carried away making it attractive and then forget to introduce the topic. Short video, please, a very short video. You can find, you can use YouTube, you can make your own, the world is your oyster. The 2 to 3 slides, please do not go over 3 slides. Remember, they're on grade 11. They should know these things. This is a reminder. Okay, a suitable poem to use as an example to identify the basic conventions of poetry. So a suitable poem, you guys can look through the matric syllabus. Grade 11 will be slightly pitched just slightly lower. You can look up, just Google all sorts of various things. Poems to teach grade 11 English first language, poems suitable for grade 11s, anything like that. Eventually you will come up with a poem. You're looking for a poem that does have figurative language and poetry conventions. It's not going to have all of them, but you want to make sure that you have enough that it justifies that poem. And then a short activity based on the content of the lesson, okay? So that would then be the what we would call the assessment phase, where the activity is supposed to assess their understanding. So remember, you're using this as an introduction to poetry. So the poem is there for them to practice their understanding of basic poetry conventions. So the activity is going to be based around using the poem to assess basic poetry conventions. Please make it engaging, make it fun, not just a worksheet. Worksheets are great, but I'm looking for something interesting. Like when I say a worksheet, I don't mean like, what does the title of the poem mean? What is the figure of speech in line 3? Why is this effective? You know, it's a valid assessment, but it's a very boring one. So I want you to think outside the box a little bit. An online quiz to recap important concepts covered in the lesson. Okay, guys, cannot emphasize this enough. You need to take screenshots. Now, you need to take screenshots of the quiz, but you also need to take screenshots of the actual slideshow. Happened in assignment 1. I warned you it was going to happen, and it did happen. Some of you included links, but the links were then broken or were outdated, and I could not access your slideshows. So I could not actually mark them. So please, please, cannot emphasize this enough. Please make sure that you have screenshots of the slideshow and of the quiz. Okay, don't have the slideshow in there and then a link to the quiz in the slideshow, and then I can't open the link. So then I can't give you any marks for your online quiz. Okay. And then question 4, once again, we have a scenario. So this teacher doesn't use formative assessments, and her students did not perform as well as yours did. So your essay should focus on the different types of assessment, the role of assessments and feedback in teaching and learning, and provide practical examples of assessment and feedback techniques that could be used in the FET classroom to improve learner performance. Okay, so you're going to have to plan this out quite carefully, how you are going to, in what order you're going to look at it, and how you're going to bring it all together. The different types of assessments we're going to go over today, and then the role of assessments and feedback in teaching and learning. And then you give your own ideas. Okay. Provide practical examples. So guys, you're not just going to take the things off the slideshow and say, well, my dearest point. You're actually going to explain what the assessment is, how it works, how you're going to give feedback, how it's going to help the students. Okay. Any questions? Okay. So she asked to elaborate on what assessment and feedback technique she means and how to answer it, explain it, list it, or give an actual example. So for question 4, when we talk about assessment and feedback techniques, you have to identify it and explain it. And then the next thing is to give a practical example. So all of it, really. I hope that helps. You can upload it separately, but it's a bit of a pain to mark that way. So I do prefer screenshots, but I'm not going to kick up a fuss if you don't. The tutu slides are not inclusive of the poem. So you've got 2 to 3 slides to explain the conventions of poetry, and then on another slide or 2 will be your actual poem. Yes, absolutely. The poem does not need to come from the government. Absolutely not. Anything that is suitable for grade 11s. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Let's go on to assessments. So first of all, what are assessments? Anyone? You can type on the board, you can type on the chat. Okay, let's look at this. Assessments are used to evaluate the performance of the learners. Yes. Evaluate progress of the learners. Absolutely. To assess the students' understanding of the knowledge. Nice. A method to test learners' knowledge and skills to see where learners are at and identify strengths and weaknesses. Tools or methods used to evaluate, measure, and document a learner's progress. They help teachers understand how well learning objectives are being met and guide future instruction. Lovely. Assessments are meant to provide us as teachers a foundation and proof of understanding of our learners. Two main types are formative and summative. Nice. A tool to measure learning, they guide teaching and help learners grow. Assessments show a learner's progress over time. Assessments can come in various forms like tests, quizzes, projects. Excellent. Right. So once again, you guys have shown a very good understanding. An assessment is anything that allows you to measure a learner's progress in any area. So it's actually a very, very broad concept, this concept of assessment. Assessment means to measure. So we are assessing, we are measuring the learner's growth, the performance, the improvement in knowledge, whether they have understood the learning objectives. So there are many, many things that we assess. It's not just about providing a mark. It's about gauging the learner at every stage of learning. So some assessments are formal, summative, sit down, write a test. And other assessments are just walking around the class to get an idea of what is happening in the class. So there is a lot to be to understand when we talk about assessments. We're not just talking about tests or exams. We are talking about a very wide spectrum of activities that we as teachers and the students undergo to measure their learning. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the different types of assessments. There are 4 main assessments. Well, there are 2 groups. The first we're going to look at is informal versus formal. Okay. Does anyone have any idea what informal assessments are? Okay, very good. Now, let's look. Okay, informal, so examples of exit tickets, understanding-based questions and activities, daily occurrences, qualitative, non-standardized ways of assessing learner knowledge, more casual ways of testing learners, for example, open-ended class discussions. Nice. Quantitative involves rubrics and memos. Okay, very nice answers here. Now, I'm going to move these down, and you'll see why in a moment. When we talk about informal assessments, what we are talking about is simply whether it's full marks or not. Okay, so informal is qualitative, which means it is based on subjective assessment, whereas formal is quantitative, which means we assign a number value. So formal assessments are the ones that are full marks. Informal assessments are the ones that are not full marks. Now, exit tickets, understanding-based questions and activities, daily occurrences, non-standard ways of assessing, yes, these do fall under informal. But in actual fact, we use different headings for assignments to talk about these things. So let me just why are you being difficult here? When we use the terms formal and informal, what we are looking at is, does it go towards the final mark? That really is the capacity in which we look at these assessments. But then we have another two categories, and I'm sure you know them. Formative, and of course, summative. Now, summative assignments are always formal. They are always full marks. Formative assessments can be informal or formal. So when we talk about informal assessment, we are talking about assessment that isn't going to go for marks. So when you ask me about the assignments that you find under your assignment page, those assignments 3.1 and 3.71, those are informal assignments. They are not for marks. Your assignment 1 is a formal assignment. However, it is a formative assessment as well, because when we look at formative, we are looking at the characteristics of this type of assessment. And this is an assessment for learning. What that means is we are assessing the learner at various stages to see how we can improve their learning. So the whole point of it is for their learning. So checking homework, walking around the class and checking their work as they do it, having class feedback sessions, activities, anything like that gives you feedback on how the learner is performing and what the learner needs to do and what you need to do to increase that learning and to move them through the zone of proximal development closer to their highest potential. And we do this through things like exit tickets, understanding-based questions and activities, daily, it's a daily occurrence, non-standardized ways of assessing learners' knowledge, more casual way of testing learners, for example, open-ended questions, class discussions. Okay, so when we talk about informal assessments, we are talking about the sort of assessment that goes on in class. It's non-standardized, it's the questions and answers, it's the exit tickets, walking around, listening to what's happening. It's informal, but it is also formative, because the whole point of doing this assessment is to gauge how well the learners have learnt. Okay, I'm going to pause here. Is anyone feeling a bit confused?
Amy, I'm sorry. For some reason, I can't even raise my hand. I don't know what's going on with my Teams. But because I can't see the screen, if someone could just do the screenshots for me again, please.
Oh, yes. Could someone please do the screenshots? Okay. But we're all feeling okay with formative. Okay, so you've got the informal formatives. Those are sort of the daily ones you do every day. They help you sort of plan on a day-to-day basis what you're going to do differently in the next lesson, what you need to recover, if you need to move on faster. Then you have the formal formative assessments. Now, this takes place at some point during the learning time. It is a formal assessment, so it is for marks. It is visible, which means you know it's for marks, you know it's coming up, you prepare for it, but it is still done early enough that the feedback provided will help you to understand where you are in your learning, what you are doing correctly, what areas you need to focus on. So it is preparing you for the summative. So it is a smaller assessment in the middle of teaching and learning before we get to the end point. Okay, so the way you look at formatives and summatives is, what is their purpose? Formative is assessment for learning. Summative is assessment of learning. So the assessment is when you reach a natural stopping point in the curriculum. So this is at the end of a course, at the end of a semester, at the end of a year. This is a final point of study. At this moment, the assessment is not to provide feedback to the learner, because by this point, the learner should know all the knowledge. This is to assess whether or not the learner has learned enough in order to progress to the next stage of teaching and learning. So, has the learner learned enough to move from grade 8 to grade 9, for example? Your summative is at the end of your course. Feedback then is too late. That is the input. Now, That doesn't mean that there is no point to feedback with summatives, but with summative feedback, it's a much longer range feedback. So as teachers, when it comes to the summative, so when it comes to exams, for example, we look at which sections the learners did well in, which sections the learners didn't do well in. So we look for patterns in the assessments, and that tells us what we need to do differently in the next stage of teaching. So, okay, this year it turned out that we tried something new with teaching comprehensions, and the marks were on average 2% higher than they were last year. So we're going to continue with this teaching approach and we're going to try and refine it. Or we noticed that this year the learners did particularly badly in poetry. So next year we know we have got to focus more on poetry. So the summative is the summit of your learning. So you can think of it as a little mountain. And we've got a little man climbing or a woman climbing. And this is a checkpoint. So that is a formative assessment, that little checkpoint to see how far up the mountain you have climbed. Have you reached that point? Have you reached that point in the correct time or condition you're in? And we'll have another little checkpoint here and another checkpoint here to check how your progression up this mountain is. And then, oops, at the very top, we check to see if you are ready to carry on and climb the next hill. Okay, so that's the summit, and the formative is the checkpoints along the way. Okay, what questions do we have here? You're all still with me? Okay, fantastic. Great. Whoops. Hold on, where am I? Yes, this is what you identify in this assignment. So you are going to spend the majority of your time talking about formative and summative, but you are going to explain what informal and formal are. Because when we talk about informal and formal assessments, we are looking at one specific aspect of assessments. And that one aspect we are looking at is, does it count for marks or not? When we talk about formative versus summative, we are looking at different aspects of the assessment. And that is, what is the purpose of the assessment? Is it to help guide the learners in their learning, or is it to assess the totality of their learning? Okay, so if I can get the correct one up. Nope, not that one. Here we go. Now, these really do, as long as you've understood the different categories, this section just gives you a bit more detail about it. Okay, so there are different forms of assessment. Informal assessment, that's assessment for learning, and formal assessment, assessment of learning. Just be careful because some formal assessments are summative, so there are also assessments for learning. Okay, so informal assessments, what you are looking at is, has the concept been understood? You observe the learners, it is qualitative, you take notes on the student and their progress. Now, this isn't always possible because you are human and you do have a limited amount of time in your lives, but taking notes of students and their progress, even if it's just small notes, will help you so much in the long run, will help you and the student, because the student has a record of where they are going and how they are going, and you also have evidence of the learner's journey. So if ever you need to explain something or you need to defend yourself, you've got this paper trail, as it were. Okay, and the many different ways to do it. Okay, so formal assessments assess the qualitative degree of the amount of learning. It rates numerically. Orals, exams, essays, for which a rubric or marking memo has been designed. So the formal assessments are standardized. Okay, so every person will take the same assessment. Even if it's something like a project or an oral, they will all be given the same directives and they will all be marked according to the same tool, which we'll get into in a moment, what we mean when we talk about assessment tools, but there will be a standardized marking tool that you will use to mark formal assessments. Okay. Nope, that's not the one I wanted. No, even worse. My apologies for this. I've got far too many open. And my computer hates me. There we go. Okay, so formative assessments, remember these are assessments for learning. They can be either formal or informal. Okay, so it's generally informal, but not always. but it provides valuable assessment that gauges ongoing progress. Okay.
Sorry, Amy, you're muted.
I'm sorry, how long was I muted for?
Not long, just like 15 seconds.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so as I was saying, formative assessment is what you use to make decisions going forward. So you actually have to look at how the learners are progressing in order to determine, okay, this is the area where they struggle the most, or this is what I am going to need to change, or they've got this concept, so I'm going to move on faster. There is a huge range of formative assessments that you can do. Anything that provides you with information on their progress that allows you to make decisions how you will deal with the learning going forward. It also provides a good touch point for the students. So also bring them in on this so they know where their weaknesses are, they know where their strengths are. Okay, it's not a secret for you to hold on to, it's for them to share in this journey as well. Okay, and then we just have examples. So stopping and observing the class, written assessments, okay, oral assessments, and just explains about scaffolding written assessments, oral assessments, what you look for, class debates, strategic or tactical questioning, exit slips, admission slips, the minute paper, revision test, muddiest point. Okay, so you can see there is a huge range. And this is not a comprehensive list. This is just some of the more prevalent ones. So it goes all the way from observing to writing assignments to oral assessments, class debates, questioning. The exit slip, that's when the learners write a summary of what they learned from the lesson. It gives you a good idea about if the lesson objectives have been met. Admission slips, this is when they hand in what they remember from the last lesson. Okay, they're called admission slips, but you can't really use them for admission to your classroom. That's non-negotiable. They have to be admitted to your classroom. But getting them to write down what they remember is also a good touch point, both for you and for the students. Because sometimes it's like, yeah, now of course I remember it. But when you're actually asked to sit down and write it, suddenly it's not so clear cut. Okay, the minute paper, so that is last 2 minutes, you get them to write, to answer questions, revision tests, self-explanatory. Muddiest point, that's where learners write down the aspect that was least clear to them. So they don't have to put their names on it, but this will give you a gauge if there is a certain point that keeps coming up. Then you know, okay, tomorrow I have to go over that point. So all of these assessments guide you and guide the learner to improving the next stage of learning. Right. Any questions?
Amy, I would like to ask the others and you. I was on a YouTube a while back listening to, as you say, it's a very long list of what one can do. And then I realized that when I ask learners in class, I'll say, who understands what I've just said and who's still having difficulty? So I give like two options. But then someone says you can do the 5-finger thing. So like, on a scale of 1 to 5, if you understand very little of what I've just said, if you're totally vague, 1 finger, and then, 5 fingers where you totally get it. And that was so cool. It just gives people more of a range, and it's more like, I think one could use it better. So that was new for me. I don't know if it's new for anyone else.
That's an excellent point. And one that's very important is that when we ask, and I know this is a bit of a do as I say, not as I do, but to be fair, you are postgrad students. When you ask, does everyone understand? Most of the time you get silence. You might have noticed that here. Because unless the learner is very, very certain of themselves, they're not really likely to put their hand up. If you phrase it, what questions do you have? You are more likely to get a response. As you pointed out, do you understand or do you need further help? Giving them that option. But the 5-fingered assessment is a fantastic way for you to very quickly gauge how comfortable the learners are. And that gives you feedback that you're not going to get if you just say, are there any questions? Or do you understand? So please do play around with the wording and the way you check in with them about how much they understand. So that was an excellent point. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so summative assessments, this takes place at a final or fixed point of learning. So the June exams would be considered summative because that is a fixed point. It's the midpoint of the year. This tells you whether you are on the right track to be able to pass the year or not. Okay, so the whole point of the summative assessment is there is a developed norm. What that means is there is a standard, and we have to compare each individual child to that standard, whether they meet it or whether they exceed it or whether they fail to meet it. So examples are exams or portfolios. Something to note, summative assessments are more visible and have a higher point value. So formative assessments can be quite casual. Even formal formative assessments tend to not be as strict or as high pressure as summative assessments. So summative assessments do tend to carry a very high weight. So if you mess up a formal assessment, it's not necessarily the end of the world. You can still make those marks up. But a summative assessment is something where it's sort of, this is a fixed point, and this is where you have to show everything you have learned. So this does tend to lead to anxiety and stress anxiety, to a little bit of panic. Okay, there is a formal method of calculating and assessing performance can provide concrete evidence and feedback of learners' understanding on a subject. So when the learner says, why did I not pass? There is concrete formal evidence of why they didn't pass. It's all done mathematically. It's very clear and very transparent. That's important, that it is transparent. Okay, and something that you do have to look at with learners is that, what do these results mean? And what's going to be the next step? So the world does not stop turning because you fail a summative. you need to now look at what your options are for moving forward. Sometimes that involves attending extra lessons. Sometimes that involves redoing a course. So it's a matter of understanding what this means for your learning. And then examples: comprehension, written tasks, oral tasks, and then formal assessments. What are the advantages of formal assessments? Remember, summative assessments are always formal. So the nice thing about formal assessment is that it eliminates educator bias and means educators are held accountable for high quality instruction, and these assessments improve education. So the whole thing is, if you have a standardized marking tool, so you have a model answer, you have a rubric, you have evidence to support the mark that you give the learners, which means you can't give the learners just any mark that you want. Sometimes you can see a learner has tried so hard, and this is so far above their normal standard of working, but we can't give them credit just because it's above their normal standard. We have to mark them against the standard norm. So it doesn't matter if you're biased towards the student, you have to give them the same marks that you would give anyone who handed in this piece of paper. So it's what the work directly in front of you says, not how much effort has gone into it that you are assessing. So results are as fair as possible. They're usually done and timed and done at the same time. So normally they're done as exams. So everyone writes the same exam for the same time. So we try to make it as fair as possible. Now, some of you will have picked up that in trying to make it as fair as possible, we've removed all multimodality. And now you can start to argue, well, which is more fair? To make sure everyone writes the same assessment under the same conditions, or whether we provide diverse assessments, will that then mean that some learners have easier assessments than others? And how will we ensure that all the assessments are the same level of difficulty? And then the disadvantages is the pressure on educators to teach to the test. So you know what's going to be in the test, and you make sure that the learners have learned that specifically, because you know that's coming up. It's very difficult not to do that, because there is a lot of pressure on the learners and on the teachers to perform well. Then, of course, there's the pressure that it places on learners, and that can also mean that learners do not perform at the expected level in formal assessments, because they feel too much pressure, and that causes them to produce work that does not reflect what they are capable of. So those are the disadvantages of formal assessments. Okay, so this is the point where I ask you to ask me questions. So to briefly recap, we've got formal and informal assessments. We use those when we are talking about, is something for marks or not? So informal isn't for marks, formal is for marks. If we are talking what is the purpose of the assessment, is it for learning or is it assessment of learning? Then we categorize it as either summative or formative. Formative can be formal or informal. Summative is always formal. Okay. So what questions or what areas of concern do you have?
Sorry, Amy.
Yes.
What happens in a situation? Say you now a new teacher and you've joined a school, and you don't set the exams, but the head of department does, and then you realize that she's been giving her learners lessons in a way to sort of groom them for the exams, so that they have a better chance at doing well. Let's say in, I don't know, short stories or poetry or whatever. What does one do in a situation like that where, so the teachers haven't used all the same material or the same slides, everyone does their own thing, and then you realize that they were advantaged? Sorry, it's like a little bit out of the topic, but it's something that could come up.
Yes. Now, that is one of those real world situations, and it does happen. I wish I could provide you with the one right answer, but the reality is there is no one right way to deal with this. For yourself, I always say, as a teacher, your job is not to teach them to pass the test. Your job is to teach them the skills. If you're successful, hopefully they'll pass the test. But you don't want them to pass the test, but not actually have understood the skills behind it. So it actually is a disadvantage to the learners if that is how they're being taught. One thing you can do is, if you notice this sort of thing happening, you can ask the teacher for some of her resources if she's willing to share them, which will give you a better understanding of the way in which to teach. But my suggestion would be, make sure that you know what is going to be assessed. Make sure that you have covered that, but also make sure that you've covered the skills and not just teaching to the test. There are many different ways of dealing with it. Other people might have other views, but that's my view, is to make sure that you've covered what will be assessed, but also the skills.
Okay, thanks. That's very wise. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, guys, I'm going to say good night. I hope that you all have a wonderful long weekend. Happy Easter to those of you who celebrate. If you have any questions, I am still hanging around, so you can still ask me. Otherwise, enjoy your weekend. Kelsey, yeah, you can. It's supposed to be one paragraph, but if you split it, it's not the end of the world, as long as you don't go over a page.